Let's be honest, harp hand position is not exactly the most natural shape for your hands to be in because when do you ever need this shape in the rest of your life? But how you set up your hand when you're playing can either support you and make it way easier to play whatever songs you want to play, or it can make things a lot harder for you. So today, let's review what good hand position looks like, and then I'm going to show you 6 very common mistakes that may have made their way into your playing. In general, your hand should kind of look as though if you were to wrap your hand around a water bottle or a mug and kind of point your thumb up, that's sort of the general shape we want for your hand. It's nice and round in your palm, in your fingers nice and curved, and then thumb pointing upwards. Now, when I actually go to put my hand next to the strings, the position is going to change a little bit because, right, my fingers are going to be spread apart from each other instead of all being wrapped around my mug or my water bottle. And I don't really want to have my palm totally facing the strings. I actually want to turn my hand over so that my palm would be kind of halfway between the floor and the strings at an angle. And that's also going to mean that my thumb isn't pointing straight up towards the ceiling. It's going to be angled over a little bit as well, and that's totally fine. Now, some things we want to look for here. We want to have lots of space between the thumb and the second finger. And I'm going to reach around behind so I can really show you. Right here. This nice round shape, if I were to hold my hand up and look at you, you can see like I'm making the letter C with my hand. So what we want to make sure is that we've got lots of space there so that when you play your thumb, it's got lots of distance to travel, and so that these fingers have lots of room to move in and out. We want to make sure that all of the joints in the finger, all of the knuckles, have a little bit of curved thumb. We want to avoid collapsing like this. Now, we don't want to forget about the rest of our arm when we go to place our hand too, because the positioning of our wrist and our elbows can really impact how our hand position looks. So we want to make sure that the elbow is away from the body, not huge chicken wings, but just enough so that you've got some space at your armpit. And we want to make sure that your wrist is fairly neutral with your hand. It can be tucked in this way a little bit, but we really want to avoid this angle for your wrist. And that's our nice, good hand position. Now, as you're checking your own hand position, I want you to be very careful because sometimes what people will do is they'll place their hand and then they'll bend around their harp like this or like this. And there's a few reasons why that's not going to be super useful for you. Number one is because this, not a very ergonomic position for your body, so I don't want you to be spending a lot of time in that position. Second thing is that, again, when you set yourself up at the harp, the positioning of your arm and the rest of your body really affects how your hand looks. So you can even see if I place my hand here and drop my elbow, my hand position changes quite a bit. Same thing, if I'm going like this, my hand position is not going to be the same as when I leaned over and when I'm playing normally. So how should you check your hand position instead? Well, you want to make sure that you can check it in such a way that you still maintain good harp posture. So that's going to mean, number one, you could set up a mirror somewhere that you can still see it while you're playing. Or number two, you can use your phone camera and set it up somewhere so that you can record your hand position and then watch it back. With that said, let's get into mistake number one. The first mistake is holding your hand too perpendicular to the strings. Now, there are multiple kinds of harp technique out there. Maybe there's a school that teaches this way. I never learned this way, but what I find is that when we have our hand, our palm, so it's totally facing the strings like this, straight on, what it does is it makes it so that my fingers are now also quite horizontal instead of angling downwards this way. And what that means is that I'm going to pull across the front of my finger, and I'm much more likely to get a nail sound instead of a nice regular harp string sound. If you're playing a wire-strung harp and you play with your fingernails, that's a different story, but that's not what we're talking about today. The other thing that can happen here is that you may just find there's an extra buildup of tension in your hand this way. So I would recommend just fixing this by turning your palm so it's a little bit more facing the floor. You can think about angling your fingers towards the floor. You could also think about this row of knuckles here, and instead of pointing them towards the wall, just turning them up a little more towards the ceiling. And that's going to get you that rounded hand position. Mistake number two is having your thumb too low. And if you've ever taken a lesson with a teacher, You've probably heard your teacher tell you your thumb was too low. I heard this until I was about in my third year of university, and probably sometimes my thumb is still too low. It's just sort of a universal harp experience, but we still want to try to work on bringing that thumb back up a little higher, right? There's a few reasons for this. So number one, if my thumb is down here and kind of pointing horizontally, I may be liable of actually closing my thumb so that it goes underneath my other fingers. And that's going to make it really hard for me to get my thumb back out again if I want to use it. The other thing it's going to do is it's not going to let my thumb really get its full range of motion. So the sound may not be very strong. And the other thing is that your thumb really benefits from having power kind of drawing into it from the arm, from the forearm. And when it's down low, it doesn't really get to make use of that, and it has to work a lot harder. So we want to keep that thumb nice and high. Mistake number 3, and this is a big one, is not having enough space between your thumb and second finger. When this space gets closed up here, first of all, thumb doesn't really get very much finger to play with, right? Like this much finger, there's not a lot of muscle here. So we want to play really like from the base of the thumb so that we can use all this muscle and all the power in our arm. And to do that, the thumb needs to have space to travel. And when we're closed up, it's much harder to do that. The other thing it does is it makes it feel really cramped in your hand. If you ever play and you feel like your fingers don't have enough room, this is maybe why. Especially for things like cross unders, like if your hand is all crunched up like this, it makes a cross under really hard. So again, here, I mean, I would really think about it. If I was in your room there with you, could I stick a finger in this hole? Could I stick a finger and is there room there, right? And if not, how could you open it up so you could stick something in there? Or again, you can think about, if you kind of think about this row of knuckles here, if they're maybe pointed a little more towards the ceiling right now, you can think about rotating them out towards the wall just a little bit. And that's going to open, again, this space right here. This next mistake can be a bit of a tricky one, and sometimes if you are like, I think my hand position is good, but playing just feels really hard and I don't know why, sometimes it's this. And it's sort of reaching the fingers really far in front of your hand. So when I've been playing before, you can kind of see, so again with my sort of like hand wrapped around the water bottle situation, you can kind of see that like my fingers are coming back around in front of my palm. But sometimes people will place their hand so that the fingers are reaching quite a bit forward from the palm, and it makes it really hard to get leverage on the strings, which means it's going to be much harder to play. So let me show you this one more time at the harp. So here's my good hand position. Here's my position where my fingers are reaching quite a bit forward from my hand. And you can see that as I do this too, my thumb is naturally going to want to come down and come a bit more horizontal as well. This is going to make it really hard for you to play your thumb. This is going to make it really hard to play like rolled chords. It's also going to make it hard for you to play your fourth finger because your fourth finger is going to be really straight. And when a finger is straight, it's much harder to play and you're going to be actually quite a bit more likely to hit multiple strings as well. So how do we fix this? This one's a little tricky, but essentially what you need to do is you need to sort of leave your fingers in place, but you want to bring your whole forearm and wrist all the way up to these knuckles. You want to bring them forward, right? So we can't sort of only bring the hand because then we're going to get some weird going on with the wrist here. We don't want this shape. And if you try to bring your elbow forward but not your wrist, then you're going to end up with something weird like this. A little uncomfortable. So again, it's kind of just thinking about maybe instead of reaching forward to the string, thinking about kind of reaching back around from behind. So thinking a little bit about curving those fingers, bringing your paw forward, or your paw, bringing your palm forward a little bit so that your thumb is not reaching forward, it's kind of sticking straight up, and having those fingertips kind of more in front of your palm rather than ahead of it. And lastly, mistake number 6 is not thinking about your wrist, your arm, your elbow, your shoulder, your posture in general. Because as I mentioned before, if your elbows are super drooped, you might end up with a wrist that looks like this. You might end up with some kind of strange position for your hand. Your hand might be kind of turned up this way instead of this way. The space between 1 and 2 might collapse, right? If my elbow's really, really low. You can try this right now. Try placing your hands on your strings with really good position, and then just like wave your elbows around and notice how the position changes. So don't forget to think about the rest of your body too. But it can be really hard to position your hands, wrists, and elbows well if your posture in general is not set up well. So check out this video next to make sure that your harp posture is helping you and not hurting you. And if you want a teacher to help you fine-tune your hand position instead of kind of struggling by yourself and not being sure if you're doing it right, my studio is taking students right now, so check out the link in the description. Thanks for watching. See you later.